Every day, the modern world consumes more than 100 million barrels of oil. It powers trucks, aircraft, factories, farms, and the ships carrying global trade. Yet before the current crisis, roughly 1/5 of that oil passed through a single narrow waterway between Iran and Oman, the Strait of Hormuz. It is a place where geography becomes power, and where one missile, one damaged tanker, or one political decision can affect fuel prices thousands of miles away. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. Oil produced by Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Iran must usually cross it before reaching international markets. In 2025, nearly 20 million barrels per day moved through this corridor, representing about 1/4 of the world's seaborne oil trade. Around 80% was headed for Asia, especially China, India, Japan, and South Korea. Unlike the Suez Canal, Hormuz cannot be bypassed by sailing around another coast. A tanker trapped inside the Persian Gulf has no alternative ocean exit. The navigable traffic system is tightly organized, with inbound and outbound lanes separated to prevent collisions among enormous vessels. In peacetime, this system makes trade efficient. During conflict, it concentrates ships into predictable corridors where drones, mines, missiles, or small attack boats can create maximum disruption. Even an unconfirmed warning can persuade captains to stop, because a fully loaded supertanker carries cargo worth tens of millions of dollars. And oil is only part of the story. About 19% of global liquefied natural gas trade also passed through Hormuz. Qatar, one of the world's biggest LNG exporters, sent approximately 93% of its shipments through the strait. That means a serious disruption does not simply threaten gasoline. It can raise electricity, heating, shipping, fertilizer, food, and manufacturing costs across multiple continents. For decades, Iran understood that Hormuz was its strongest pressure point. Closing the strait completely would also damage Iran's own exports and anger neighboring countries, so Tehran usually treated the threat as leverage. The assumption was that every side had too much to lose for a lasting closure. That calculation collapsed on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched airstrikes against Iran. Tehran responded with attacks across the region and effectively restricted passage through Hormuz. Tankers slowed, insurers withdrew coverage, crews faced extreme danger, and ships gathered inside and outside the Persian Gulf. The United States simultaneously blockaded Iranian vessels in their ports, turning the waterway into both an energy choke point and a bargaining weapon. The scale of the disruption was historic. According to the International Energy Agency, flows through Hormuz fell from around 20 million barrels per day before the conflict to an average of only 2.7 million during March, April, and May. By June, cumulative Middle Eastern supply losses had exceeded 1.3 billion barrels. The agency called it the largest oil supply disruption in history. Oil prices reacted immediately. Brent crude, the international benchmark, climbed from pre-war levels near $70 and eventually peaked around $126 per barrel. Diesel and jet fuel markets became even tighter because the crisis blocked not only crude oil, but also refined products and petrochemical feedstocks. The IEA's member countries responded by authorizing an unprecedented release of 400 million barrels from emergency reserves. Those reserves bought time, but they could not recreate normal trade. Strategic stockpiles are finite. They can soften a shock while governments negotiate, but they cannot permanently replace millions of missing barrels every day. Producers outside the Gulf also increased supply. Refineries changed the types of crude they processed. Buyers searched for cargoes from the Americas, West Africa, and the North Sea, and consumers reduced demand as prices climbed. These adjustments prevented an even larger explosion in prices, but they came with higher transportation costs and longer voyages. Oil prices complicate the fight against inflation. Transport and production costs spread through every industry, forcing central banks to choose between maintaining high interest rates and supporting economies weakened by expensive energy. Exporting countries outside the Gulf may earn more, but importers face trade deficits and weaker currencies. For poorer households, the impact is immediate because fuel, electricity, and food consume more of their income. Why not simply send Gulf oil through pipelines? Saudi Arabia operates an east-west pipeline to the Red Sea, while the UAE has a pipeline leading to Fujairah, outside Hormuz. Together, alternative routes may redirect between 3.5 and 5.5 million barrels per day. That is valuable, but it is nowhere close to the 20 million barrels that previously crossed the strait. Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar remain especially dependent on access through the Persian Gulf. Iraq demonstrates the problem clearly. Before the war, it produced around 4 million barrels of oil per day, but restricted tanker access left it searching for alternatives. Baghdad is now considering larger exports through Turkey's Ceyhan port, Syria's Banias port, and Jordan's Aqaba port. On August 22nd, Iran granted special permission for several Iraqi tankers to pass through Hormuz after repeated diplomatic requests. The exemption offered limited relief, but it also revealed how political permission had replaced predictable commercial access. The present situation remains dangerously unclear. U.S. officials say American forces have helped move a 7-day average of roughly 8 million barrels per day through the strait. Yet ship tracking data recorded only 4 commodity vessels crossing on one recent Thursday, with no large crude carriers or LNG tankers among them. Some ships may switch off tracking signals, and different measurements capture different cargoes, but every credible estimate remains far below pre-war activity. This uncertainty creates its own cost. A tanker does not need to be attacked for prices to rise. Owners must consider missiles, drones, mines, seizures, delayed cargoes, and the possibility that insurance will not cover a loss. Crews may refuse the voyage, and charter rates can jump before a ship even approaches the Gulf. That risk premium is eventually passed from traders and refiners to airlines, trucking companies, manufacturers, and ordinary consumers. Asia carries the greatest direct exposure. In 2024, China, India, Japan, and South Korea together received almost 70% of the crude and condensate moving through Hormuz. The United States now imports much less Gulf oil than it once did. But that does not isolate American drivers. Oil is priced globally. If Asian buyers compete for barrels from other regions, prices rise everywhere. Natural gas adds another layer. The disruption reduced LNG exports from Qatar and the UAE by more than 300 million cubic meters per day, according to the IEA. European and Asian buyers then had to compete for alternative shipments. Higher gas prices feed into electricity bills and the production of ammonia and fertilizer, which can ultimately raise the cost of food. By August, the damage was visible far beyond the shipping lanes. The IEA forecasts global oil demand would decline by 1.6 million barrels per day in 2026 because elevated prices and the continuing closure were suppressing consumption. Global oil inventories had fallen by roughly 410 million barrels since the war began, while millions of barrels of Gulf production remained shut in. This is known as demand destruction. Energy becomes so expensive that households and businesses are forced to use less, postpone travel, cut production, or cancel investment. Diplomacy briefly offered hope. A June memorandum created a 60-day framework intended to reduce fighting and reopen the strait, but the agreement unraveled as each side accused the other of violating its terms. Iran demanded an end to the U.S. blockade, relief from oil sanctions, access to frozen assets, and an end to military threats. Washington insisted that Iran guarantee safe and unrestricted passage. By late August, formal progress had stalled, new sanctions were approaching, and Tehran continued threatening unauthorized tankers. There are only a few realistic paths forward. A negotiated agreement could pair verified freedom of navigation with phased sanctions relief and security guarantees. International escorts and demining operations could reduce physical danger, while governments could temporarily support maritime insurance. More pipelines and diversified energy supplies could lower future dependence. But those projects require years, not weeks. The Strait of Hormuz crisis is therefore bigger than a regional dispute. It exposes a structural weakness in the global economy. Enormous energy flows depend on a passage that cannot be quickly replaced. Emergency reserves, alternative producers, and reduced demand can absorb part of the shock, but none can erase the geography. For consumers, the crisis may appear as a higher fuel receipt, an airline surcharge, an electricity bill, or more expensive food. Behind every increase is the same narrow channel, crowded with warships, cautious tankers, and competing claims of control. The final outcome will depend on whether the United States and Iran decide that economic pressure has achieved enough, or whether each believes the other can still be forced to surrender. Until that question is answered, Hormuz will remain more than a strait. It will remain a switch capable of sending shockwaves through the entire world economy.